Good afternoon, algebra students. Today we will factor quadratic trinomials again. Only this time we will factor with when the leading coefficient does not equal 1. That means it's going to be greater than 1. So the leading coefficient will be greater than 1. So let's get started. We'll have 6 examples. First of all, let's review the format of a quadratic trinomial. Here we have ax squared, this is a, bx squared, b is the coefficient that goes with x, and c is your constant. So ax squared plus bx plus c. And so to factor the quadratic trinomial with a coefficient greater than 1, we're really not going to do this. We're going to do something like it. We're going to I'll show you how on the first example. Alright, so what you're going to do is you're looking again for factors, two binomial factors that add to, two binomial factors that when you multiply them together you get the trinomial. So your steps are going to be, this is how you're going to start. You're going to multiply a times c. Now remember what we saw before, which was a x squared plus bx plus c. So that means you're going to multiply a times c together, and then you're going to look for two numbers that are factors or that multiply to get that product of a and c, but then they also add to b. And then after that I'm going to show you two different methods of factoring, and I will repeat those two different methods on several problems, and then you can pick which way you would like. Alright, so let's start with this first problem. So the first thing we want to do is identify your a, b, and c. So a is 6, and b is 7, and c is negative 3. Then you want to multiply the a times c. So 6 times negative 3. Well, 6 times negative 3 is negative 18. So then you're going to look for factors that multiply to negative 18, but then they have to add to 7. So you'll start with 18 and 1, and because 18 is negative, it has to be a positive and a negative. And the positive has to be bigger because you have a plus 7. When you add it together, you have a positive. So then we'll do 2 and 9. And 2 and 9 could multiply to 18, and they could also add to 7. Which one has to be the positive, the greater number? So you'd have a positive 9 and a negative 2. Negative 2 times 9 is negative 18. So those are going to be your factors. Now there's two ways that we're going to do this. The first way is, what you're going to do is rewrite the problem, only write it with your two factors. So instead of doing plus 7x, you do plus 9x minus 2x. So those would go in the center, and then do minus 3. Now that you've written that, now what you're going to do is you're going to do factor by grouping, because you have 4 terms. So we're going to factor by grouping, and we group the first two terms together, put a plus sign in the middle, and the second two terms together. Now I'm going to factor out of the left the greatest common factor, so I can factor out a 3 and an x, so that 3x would go here. And then when I factor it out, when I divide 6 by 3, I get 2, and here I'd get an x, and then I would get a 3 here. Now what I'm going to do is factor out a greatest common factor here. Because this leading term is a negative 2, and I don't have any other factors, I'm just going to factor out a negative 1. So I'd put minus 1 right here, and then divide. So negative 2 divided by negative 1 would be 2x, and negative 3 divided by negative 1 would be plus 3. And again, these two terms match right here, and they're supposed to. If they don't match, you have doing something wrong. So then my factors, if I rewrite them, would be 3x minus 1 times 2x plus 3. And this would be my answer, the two factors. So this is factoring. To double check, I could FOIL. So to FOIL, to double check, we'll do that over here. So FOIL, which means 3 times 3x times 2x gives me 6x squared. And then I would get 3 times 3 would be 9x. And then I'd get a negative 2x. And then I'd get minus 3. And then I could combine like terms. But I already know that this is exactly what I came up with when I got that. So I know that this is going to give me the right answer, plus 7x minus 3. You don't have to check every time, but it is good to know how to do it. All right, so what I think I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the next problem and show you this method again, and then I'm going to show you the other method. Okay, so first we need to identify the A, B, and C, so I'm going to do that first. So A is 6, B is 13, and C is 6. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the A times the C. So 6 times 6 is a positive 36. So that means I'm looking for factors that multiply to 36 but add to 13. Then I will list some factors, 36 and 1, can't be it. 2 and 18, that cannot add to that. So 3 times what? 3 and 12? 3 and 12. That will not add to 13. 4 and 9, there it is, 4 and 9. So 4 and 9 would add to 13. So then what I want to do is I'm going to rewrite this 6r squared, and instead of plus 13r, I'm going to write and use these two as plus 9r and plus 4r, and then plus 6. And then what I'm going to do is do factor by grouping. So I'll group the first two terms and then the second two terms together, divide out a greatest common factor of 3r, put the 3r in front, and then see what my leftovers are. So 6 divided by 3 is 2, and then I'd get an r, and then 9 divided by 3 is 3. Do the same thing over here. I don't have a negative sign. Let's see what I can divide out. I'm just going to divide out a positive 2. So I would put plus 2. Remember, whatever you divide out goes in front, and then your remainder goes here. So 4 divided by 2 is 2r, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. And these match. So my answer is going to be 3r plus 2 times 2r plus 3. And we can double check by doing FOIL. So we can multiply 3 times 2 is 6r squared, and then plus 9r plus 4r here, and then 2 times 3 makes 6. And so I should get what I originally started with, and I do. So there's my answer right there. All right, I'm going to show you another method. All right, so the next method is the reverse box method. So you're going to do the same thing. First, you're going to identify the A, the B, and the C. So A is negative 20, and let me pause. Here's your A, B, and C. Now multiply the A times the C. When I multiply, I get a positive 40. So I'm looking for things that multiply to 40 but add to a negative 13. That's what I'm looking for. So now I'm going to list my factors of 40, 40 and 1, 2 and 20, 3 doesn't go in, 4 and 10, that's almost it, that's 14. Let's see, 5 and 4. I don't think I have any more factors. So I'm wrong. 4 and 5 won't work. It's got to be 5 and 8. 5 and 8. And guess what? That adds to 13. So let's think about this. I have to multiply to a positive 40 but add to negative 13. So that means these both have to be negative because a negative 8 and a negative 15 make negative 13. But when you multiply them, you get a positive 40. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work backwards with my box. So remember the box, you're looking for two binomials that multiply together. So what I do with my box is I fill in with this trinomial. So I know that the negative 20x squared goes here, and I put the negative 2 at the bottom right corner. Then the two factors that I found, those are going to go here, negative 8x and negative 5x. Now you might have to reverse those around. You might have to switch those at some point. So then what you're going to do is you're going to work backwards, and you look at this here and you say, okay, what multiplies to negative 20x squared? Well, you know you have to have an x and an x. So an x and an x makes x squared. And then to get a negative 20, you could do, here you have a negative 5, so you could do a negative 5 and a positive 4. So that makes negative 20. Now, how would, coming over to this box, you have negative 5x. What would I multiply to get negative 5x? Well, I would multiply by plus 1. Negative 5x times 1 gives me negative 5x. Then I'm going to go down to this box, and I do 4x times what would give me negative 8. Well, I already have an x, so I don't have to multiply by x, but then I could multiply by a negative 2. And then to double check, I have to make sure that this negative 2 times that 1 makes this negative 2, and it does. So now my answers are negative 5x minus 2 goes there, times 4x plus 1. And then I can double check and FOIL to make sure that that works. So I will do that here. So if I multiply those two together, I get negative 20x squared. And then this times that would make negative 5x. And then these two together would make negative 8x. And then negative 2 times 1 would make negative 2. If I add those middle two terms together, I get negative 2x squared minus 13x minus 2. And that's what I originally started with. So that's a check. And those are my two binomials that multiply. Let's try this method one more time. Okay, so here's the problem. Write down your a, b, and c. Alright, so a is negative 2, b is negative 1, and c is 10. Now multiply the a times the c, so negative 2 times 10 gives me negative 20. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to negative 20, but then add to negative 1. Alright, so I'm going to just think through. I could do 20 and 1, I could do 10 and 2, or I could do 4 and 5. And to me, 4 and 5 looks like that might work. One of them has to be negative because you have negative 20, so this negative 5 and this would be positive, because when you add them together you would get a negative 1. So to do the box method, we'll do the box method again. So I'm going to write the box, and inside I put this term at the first corner, then I put this 10 at the end, plus 10, and then I fill in the box with those two numbers. So I'm going to do plus 4x and minus 5x. Okay, so now I'm going to work backwards. What two numbers multiply to get negative 2x squared? Well, let's see. If I put an x here and an x here, that gives me the x squared. And then I need a negative 2 and a positive 1. So because this is negative 4 over here, I'm going to put the negative 2 there. And then I don't really have to write a 1. So then I look and see, all right, negative 2x times what will give me negative 4x? Well, I already have an x, so I don't need an x. Negative 2 times positive 2 would give me a negative 4. So I would do positive 2. So negative 2x times a positive 2 gives me negative 4x. So that works. Now I'm going to go and look at the negative 5x. What can I multiply this x by to get negative 5x? Well, negative 5. Now I have to double check. So x times negative 5 gives me that negative 5x. And then I have to verify that negative 5 times 2 gives me positive 10. and it does not, so I'm doing something wrong. Okay, and so I know what I did wrong. So now I have to kind of go back and fix it. So notice here that I had a +4 and a -5. So that means this should be plus, which means this up here should be -2. So that's my mistake, and you probably already saw that. So -2 times -2 gives me a positive 4x there. Now I have a -2 times a -5. That gives me a positive 10. So there's a real life an example of making a mistake and then having to go back and kind of fix it. So let's see what our answer is. Our answers are going to be -2x minus 5. And then this would be x minus 2. So let's verify using FOIL that this works. So let's do -2x times x gives me -2x squared. -2x times -2 gives me positive 4x. Then this gives me -5x. And then these two together make positive 10. And then if I add these two terms together, I get -2x squared minus x plus 10. Now, did I start with that? Yes. So that verifies that these two binomials are my answer. Okay, so we have two more problems. I'm going to do the box on one, and I'll do the grouping on one. And you can pick which one you would like to do. All right, if you want to go ahead and try and pause this and work it, and then double check your answer. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do the grouping on this one. So there are my A, B, and C. Then I multiply 9 times 1 and get 9. So I'm looking for factors that multiply to 9 and add to 6. Okay, so 3 times 3 is an obvious choice. So I'm going to use 3 and 3. Now I'm going to do the grouping. So I'm going to do 9x squared, bring that down. I'm going to break the 6x into a 3x and another 3x, and then I'll have plus 1. And then I'm going to group the first two terms together and the second two terms together. Then I'm going to divide by, put a plus sign, I'm going to divide by a common factor of 3x. And when I do that, I bring that out front, put my remainder here, and this divides to 1. So remember, 3x divided by 3x is 1. Then I put a, see what I'm going to divide by here. I'm going to divide by plus 1. That's the only thing you can divide by. There's no other factors. So you have to divide by something. So if the only thing you can divide by is 1, then that's what you do. So plus 1 there. And then when I divide, I get 3x plus 1. So then, notice that those match. So my answer is going to be 3x plus 1 times 3x plus 1. I'm going to FOIL to check. So there's my answer. FOIL, I'd get 3 times 3 is 9x squared. That's these two. And then plus 3x. And then plus 3x again. And then 1 times 1 is 1. So this checks, because that's going to add to 6x. All right, one more. All right, this one I'm going to do the box. So first identify A, B, and C. A is -7, B is 34, and C is 5. Next, multiply A times C, you get -35. Numbers that multiply to -35, and then they add to 34. Well, if it's going to add to 34, then it's obvious to me that it's going to have to be 35 and 1. And one of them is negative, and since this middle term has to be positive, the 35 is bigger as positive, and that's a -1. So now I'm going to do the box method. You can do the grouping if you'd rather, or you can try whichever one and pause me. So I'll put this first term, -7y squared, and then I'll put the 5 at the end, and then I'm going to put 35y here and -1y there. Now I work backwards, so I know I have to have a y and a y. And if I do the negative 7 here, because I know it's going to multiply to 35, and I would just put a 1y there. So if I do 1y, so first of all I'm going to do, I have these two. Now I see, what can I multiply this by to get a negative y? Well, it would be a negative 1. So double check, this times negative 1 gives me that. Then I'm going to see what I have to multiply to get 35. Well, negative 7 times a negative 5 would give me a positive 35y. So this times this gives me positive 35y. Then I double check to make sure that the negative 5 times the negative 1 would give me a positive 5, and it does. So now I have my answers. I have y minus 5, and then I have negative 7y minus 1. And again, we can FOIL to double check. So I would multiply, I get negative 7y squared, and then I'd get negative y. Then I would get positive 35y, and then I would get positive 5. And yes, these two add up to get 34y, so I end up with the correct answer and back where I started. So my answer is here. These two factors multiply to get that trinomial. Okay, this lesson is a little long, but it's kind of complicated. Hopefully you've determined which method you like the best and you're ready to tackle your homework. Thanks for watching.